I never expected moving in would feel like stepping into someone else's memory. Eleanor Miller whispered to herself as she turned the key in the lock of her new apartment. The hallway was quiet, the soft hum of the heater mingling with the distant sound of traffic outside. The boxes were stacked neatly against the walls, each labeled carefully: kitchen, bedroom, books, memories. She set down her purse and glanced around, taking in the pale beige walls, the sunlight filtering through the blinds, casting stripes across the wooden floors. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and old carpet, a mix that felt strangely comforting and alien at the same time. Eleanor walked slowly through the living room, her fingers grazing the edge of the sofa, running along the bookshelf she had placed at just the right corner, imagining where each photo frame would go. She had always liked order, structure, a sense that things had a place, a purpose. Her mind wandered briefly to Robert, to the way he had meticulously chosen this apartment for her, insisting on sunlight in the mornings and a view of the small park across the street. The memory brought a soft ache to her chest, a tenderness she tried to keep buried under the practical motions of unpacking. She opened the boxes labeled kitchen first, arranging plates and mugs just so, stacking the pans carefully, lining the spice jars by height, as if organizing them could restore some measure of control to the world that had recently shifted so unpredictably. Each movement was deliberate, calm, even meditative, but underneath, there was a hum of anticipation, a prickling sense that something unseen was waiting. When she reached the bedroom, Eleanor paused at the nightstand she had placed near the window. A small envelope, yellowed and tucked behind the drawer, caught her eye. Her heart skipped a beat. She picked it up gingerly, fingers tracing the familiar handwriting. Robert's handwriting. She set the envelope on the bed, turned it over in her hands, feeling the weight of paper and the echoes of his voice in every curve of the letters. With a deep breath, Eleanor sat down, letting the quiet settle around her, the apartment. Humming gently, as if holding its breath, she carefully slid open the envelope, pulling out the folded letter inside. The paper was soft, slightly worn at the edges, the ink still clear. As she unfolded it, her eyes traced the first lines. "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, it means I am gone and you have found your new beginning. There are things you must know, things I could not say aloud, but I trusted you to understand." Eleanor's hands tightened slightly around the letter, a mixture of sorrow and the flicker of something else: resolve, curiosity, determination. The words continued, hinting at family secrets, small missteps, and hidden truths that Robert had protected from her to spare her worry. Yet he had left her the knowledge now, carefully, intentionally. Eleanor's eyes moved faster, scanning each sentence, feeling the pulse of his presence in every line, a warmth that was comforting yet haunting. Outside, the sunlight shifted, the shadows lengthening across the floor, and Eleanor felt a sudden clarity. This was more than a letter. It was a map, a guide through a maze of family dynamics she had only glimpsed before. She stood slowly, holding the letter to her chest, breathing deeply. The apartment felt different now, no longer just a place to live, but a space filled with purpose, history, and a subtle urgency. Eleanor placed the letter gently on the dresser, allowing herself a moment to look out the window at the park below, noticing the children playing, the neighbors passing by, the rhythm of life continuing. She imagined the conversations she would have, the questions she would ask, the discoveries she would make. Her fingers brushed the edge of the envelope again, tracing the ink one last time, before she set it down firmly, a signal to herself that she was ready. Ready to explore, to uncover, to face whatever truths lay in wait. Eleanor felt a quiet thrill, a tension coiled beneath her calm exterior. The apartment was hers, yes, but it also held echoes of Robert's careful watch, his protective presence, and the secrets he had left behind. And as she closed the drawer and walked toward the window, the sun catching the hair at her temples, Eleanor Miller knew this was not just a move. It was the first step into a story she was determined to see through, a path lit by memory, mystery, and the weight of love that refused to fade. The morning sunlight poured through the blinds, painting golden stripes across the hardwood floors as Eleanor Miller stood by the kitchen sink, her hands submerged in warm water. She rinsed the dishes she had unpacked the night before, listening to the soft clatter and the distant hum of the city waking outside. Each cup, each plate she placed in its designated spot felt like a small act of establishing order, a quiet reassurance in a world that had suddenly felt unpredictable. She paused for a moment, letting the suds slip through her fingers, and thought of the note she had discovered yesterday. It lingered in her mind, a whisper of secrets meant to guide her, to warn her, but not to frighten. Eleanor knew she had to tread carefully, that understanding the full picture required patience, observation, and a steady hand. She dried her hands slowly, running the towel across her knuckles, and moved to the living room, where the unpacked boxes waited patiently. She opened a small box marked Books, carefully sliding each hardcover onto the newly installed shelves, aligning the spines until they were perfectly flush. The act was soothing, a meditative focus that allowed her mind to wander freely without feeling lost in anxiety. As she worked, she recalled Robert's voice, calm and reassuring, reminding her to trust her instincts and notice the subtleties in people's actions, the unspoken words that often carried more truth than those spoken aloud. Eleanor thought about Victoria Miller, the way she had always smiled just slightly too perfectly, her politeness carrying the faint edge of control that Eleanor had ignored for too long. The letter suggested Eleanor look closer, to pay attention to patterns, to details that she had previously dismissed as inconsequential. Her eyes fell on a small drawer she had not yet opened, tucked into the corner of her dresser. It was ordinary, unassuming, and yet something about it called to her. She knelt, fingers tracing the edges, and felt the familiar sensation of discovery, the thrill of piecing together fragments of information that had been deliberately hidden. Inside, she found a stack of papers, neatly tied with a thin ribbon. Eleanor lifted the top sheet, reading the names, dates, and notations carefully pinned by Robert, documenting conversations, appointments, and small observations that now felt like a roadmap. She leaned back, absorbing the weight of the knowledge, the meticulous care he had taken to ensure she would know the truth in due course. A sense of quiet determination filled her as she moved from the dresser to the window, watching the neighbors walking dogs, the joggers passing by the park across the street, the mundane rhythm of the city carrying on, oblivious to the secrets that Eleanor now held. Each detail she had gathered, each observation noted in Robert's letter, gave her a subtle power, a foothold in a situation that could have easily left her feeling vulnerable. Eleanor made a mental list, organizing her approach: observe, confirm, verify, and then decide. She reminded herself to remain calm, to maintain the facade of normalcy while quietly uncovering the truth. The sun climbed higher, and Eleanor walked through the apartment, opening drawers, checking behind books, noticing little discrepancies and signs that had previously escaped her attention. The day was unfolding slowly, each movement deliberate, each step measured, as Eleanor embraced the methodical process Robert had entrusted to her. The apartment, with its quiet spaces and soft light, had become a laboratory of observation, a place where Eleanor could reconcile the past, understand the present, and plan carefully for what was to come. She paused by the sofa, placing a small photograph she had retrieved from a box next to the letter on the coffee table, aligning it just so. The photograph showed Robert smiling, eyes bright, hands gently resting on hers, a silent reminder of trust, wisdom, and the importance of vigilance. Eleanor Miller sat back, letting the afternoon sun wash over her, feeling a measured resolve settle in her chest. She knew the path ahead required patience, careful attention, and a clear mind. The apartment was no longer just a new beginning. It was a place of preparation, reflection, and quiet strategy, where every small act of arranging, observing, and remembering contributed to understanding the story her late husband had left for her to follow. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the apartment as Eleanor Miller moved through the rooms with quiet deliberation. Each step was measured, her eyes scanning the surfaces, the corners, and the shelves for anything that might provide another clue. She picked up a stack of letters tied with a thin ribbon, feeling the texture of the paper, the familiar weight of Robert's handwriting guiding her. She unfolded the top sheet, reading carefully, noting the dates and details he had meticulously recorded. The notes mentioned conversations with Victoria, small hints of her maneuvers that Eleanor had overlooked, moments that now appeared in stark clarity. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, spreading the papers before her like a map, tracing the paths of interactions, observing the patterns that had previously seemed innocuous. Her mind worked deliberately, quietly connecting dots, recalling small incidents, misplaced keys, unexplained phone calls, subtle changes in behavior that had once seemed trivial. She made notes on a pad beside her, writing down each observation, each suspicion, and each confirmation from the letters. The apartment was silent except for the soft scratch of pen on paper and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Eleanor paused, looking around, letting the calm envelop her while the weight of discovery settled in her chest. She walked to the living room, pulling a chair to the window, and watched the world outside. Neighbors returning from errands, a dog walker guiding a small pack down the sidewalk, children laughing in the park. Each ordinary detail contrasted with the careful plotting that had taken place behind the scenes, highlighting the subtle manipulations she was beginning to uncover. Eleanor returned to the papers, her eyes scanning for anything that might indicate Robert's intentions, any hidden advice he had left her about how to handle the complex dynamics with Victoria. Her hands smoothed over the notes, committing them to memory, her thoughts deliberate and strategic. She noticed a photograph tucked between the papers, a snapshot of a family gathering months ago. Victoria smiling broadly while Robert stood beside Eleanor, his hand resting lightly on hers. The image reminded her of trust and vigilance, the importance of recognizing truth beneath appearances. Eleanor rearranged the papers, stacking them neatly in the order she had assigned, each pile representing a thread of understanding she intended to follow. She leaned back in the chair, taking a deep breath, feeling the sunlight warm her face, grounding herself in the present moment while preparing for the careful steps ahead. Her gaze returned to the window, the city unfolding with its everyday rhythm, unaware of the quiet revelations occurring within the apartment. Eleanor's resolve strengthened with each passing minute, a sense of purpose guiding her. The apartment, once just a new beginning, had become a space of insight and preparation, where patience and observation would guide her through the delicate unraveling of family secrets. She stood, moving to a bookshelf, placing the letters and photographs in plain sight but in careful order, creating a visual reminder of the story she was piecing together. Eleanor Miller knew that understanding the past, observing the present, and planning the future required a keen mind, calm determination, and the ability to remain composed while uncovering the truth. She walked through the apartment one last time, touching each surface, noting the details, and feeling a quiet anticipation for the next steps in the careful, methodical path she was beginning to follow. The light in Eleanor Miller's apartment shifted subtly as the afternoon moved toward evening, the golden sunlight dimming into soft amber across the walls. She moved from room to room, arranging small items she had unpacked, each placement deliberate, almost ritualistic, grounding her in the moment while her mind traced the threads of information Robert had left. The papers and letters she had examined earlier lay neatly on the coffee table, yet her thoughts kept returning to them, connecting details, noticing patterns, and recalling moments she had dismissed in the past. Eleanor paused by the bookshelf, her fingers grazing the spines of the books she had placed just so, and remembered Robert's gentle reminders to observe, to pay attention to subtleties, and to trust her instincts. She thought of Victoria Miller, her polite smile masking intentions that now became clear in hindsight. Eleanor allowed herself a quiet sigh, acknowledging the careful choreography of family interactions she had once taken at face value. Each note Robert had left was like a breadcrumb, guiding her understanding, revealing intentions and hidden decisions. She returned to the kitchen, arranging cups and plates, the sound of clinking porcelain filling the otherwise still apartment. The simplicity of the act was calming, a steady rhythm against the undercurrent of intrigue and discovery. As she worked, Eleanor reflected on the past few months, remembering small signs, subtle shifts in behavior, moments that now seemed like clues, carefully overlooked at the time. She paused, her gaze resting on the window where sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting lines across the floor like markers of time, each stripe a reminder of the patience and observation required. Eleanor moved to the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed and holding one of Robert's letters close, reading and rereading the words, internalizing his guidance. The letter mentioned decisions made in her absence, hints of manipulation and strategies she had not perceived before, and small acts of foresight intended to equip her with clarity and understanding. Eleanor's mind mapped out the connections, her thoughts deliberate, analytical, yet accompanied by a quiet emotional resonance, the warmth of Robert's presence in memory guiding her reasoning. She stood, stretching her arms slowly, letting the light touch her face, feeling the apartment settle around her, embracing her in calm, reflective space. The sofa and chairs, the carefully placed photographs, and the orderly stacks of books and papers were no longer just objects. They were elements of a living map, each holding significance, each pointing toward insights she was gathering, moment by moment. Eleanor walked back to the living room window, looking down at the street where neighbors passed, children played, and the ordinary hum of life continued, oblivious to the intricate revelations she was piecing together inside. Her fingers brushed the letters once more, the familiar handwriting of Robert a tactile anchor to the past and a guide into her present understanding. Eleanor Miller felt a quiet confidence, the patience to observe, the clarity to notice details, and the composure to plan her next steps with precision. The apartment had transformed from a simple new beginning into a space of reflection, strategy, and understanding, where every movement, every observation, and every careful choice prepared her for the unfolding story that Robert had entrusted to her. The late afternoon light softened, casting gentle shadows across Eleanor Miller's apartment as she settled into a chair by the window, the letters and notes from Robert laid out before her. She traced her fingers over the edges of the papers, absorbing the careful observations he had recorded, the subtle guidance embedded in every line. Eleanor's mind worked methodically, connecting threads she had noticed in passing before but now could see with clarity, each detail building upon another to reveal patterns of behavior and intent. The quiet hum of the city outside was a steady backdrop, allowing her thoughts to form without distraction, each revelation landing with quiet gravity. She rose to examine a small side table near the sofa, noticing a photograph she had previously overlooked, depicting Robert and Victoria smiling in a moment that now carried new meaning. The juxtaposition of genuine affection and underlying tension was evident, and Eleanor noted it silently, committing it to memory. Moving to the bedroom, she carefully opened drawers and examined items she had unpacked, treating the apartment like a laboratory of insight, observing the placement of objects, small traces of past routines, and the lingering presence of daily life that had been carefully curated. Eleanor paused at the kitchen counter, running her hands along the smooth surface, reflecting on Robert's consistent attention to detail and the subtle lessons hidden within the notes he had left. She thought of the times she had brushed aside minor inconsistencies, small remarks from Victoria that now revealed their significance, and felt a quiet sense of empowerment in recognizing the truth that had previously eluded her. Each paper, photograph, and note became a building block, a fragment of understanding she carefully assembled into a cohesive picture of the past and present. Eleanor placed the letters back on the coffee table in neat stacks, aligned just so, a visual representation of her thought process and growing clarity. She walked slowly to the window, looking down at the familiar streets, noting neighbors returning from errands, children playing, the rhythm of ordinary life continuing uninterrupted, yet beneath it, Eleanor sensed the layers of information she had gathered, forming a web of insight and comprehension. She made a deliberate mental map, identifying patterns of communication, subtle manipulations, and hints left by Robert that served as a guide for her next steps. The apartment, once simply a space for a fresh start, had become a carefully organized sanctuary of observation, reflection, and preparation. Eleanor Miller felt a quiet determination settle within her, a sense of readiness and calm focus, knowing that every small act, every detail noted, and every careful observation would contribute to her understanding and navigation of the complex family dynamics that awaited. She breathed slowly, allowing the sunlight to warm her face, feeling the apartment embrace her with the stillness and clarity she needed. Eleanor knew that patience and careful attention were her allies, and that each moment spent studying, observing, and reflecting brought her closer to the truth she was determined to uncover. The letters, the photographs, the notes, and the memories intertwined seamlessly, forming a path she was prepared to follow, guided by insight, careful reasoning, and the enduring presence of Robert's wisdom. Evening settled over Eleanor Miller's apartment, the sunlight fading into a soft, muted glow that spilled across the floors and walls. She moved slowly through the rooms, her eyes attentive to every detail, every nuance in the space she had claimed as her own. The letters and notes from Robert lay neatly on the coffee table, each document a fragment of insight, a window into truths she had yet to fully understand. Eleanor picked up one sheet and reread the passages, her fingers tracing the handwriting, the careful punctuation, the subtle emphasis Robert had left behind to guide her understanding. She reflected on the patterns she had observed in Victoria Miller's behavior, the way small inconsistencies and subtle manipulations had previously passed unnoticed but now formed a clear picture. Eleanor organized the papers into categories, separating observations from confirmations, speculations from facts, creating a system that allowed her to navigate the complexity with clarity and precision. She paused at the window, watching as the city continued its rhythm outside, pedestrians moving in measured patterns, the distant sounds of traffic punctuating the quiet of her apartment. Eleanor felt the weight of knowledge and the responsibility it carried, knowing that each decision she made would be informed by careful observation and understanding. She moved to the kitchen, arranging utensils and cups with deliberate precision, each motion reinforcing a sense of control, of order, a contrast to the uncertainty she had experienced before. Eleanor's mind wandered to past conversations, recollections of subtle remarks, the slight tension in gestures, and the quiet observations Robert had noted that now illuminated the intentions behind actions she had previously misinterpreted. Each memory, each note, each carefully preserved document formed a mosaic of understanding that Eleanor pieced together with patient diligence. She considered her next steps, knowing that patience and timing were essential, that acting impulsively would undermine the careful construction of insight she had achieved. Eleanor moved to the bedroom and opened a small box she had not yet examined, discovering another collection of letters and photographs that reinforced her understanding, providing additional context and clarity. She handled each item gently, noting dates, names, and details, compiling them mentally into an ever-expanding map of knowledge. The apartment felt alive with the weight of discovery, each space holding reminders, clues, and pieces of the puzzle Robert had entrusted to her. Eleanor stood by the window again, the last rays of sun casting a gentle warmth across her face, and she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She recognized the careful balance between observation and action, between patience and decision, and understood that her strength lay in her ability to remain composed while gathering insight. Eleanor Miller moved through the apartment one final time for the evening, touching surfaces, noting details, and reaffirming the order she had established. The letters, the notes, and the photographs were no longer mere objects. They were instruments of understanding, guiding her toward clarity, purpose, and measured steps in navigating the subtle complexities of family dynamics. She felt a quiet resolve settle within her, a calm determination to proceed thoughtfully, guided by observation, insight, and the careful wisdom of Robert's enduring presence. The night deepened around Eleanor Miller's apartment, the city lights twinkling faintly through the blinds as she moved with quiet purpose. She walked from room to room, pausing at each surface, each stack of papers, each photograph, letting her eyes absorb the subtle details she had carefully noted throughout the day. The letters from Robert were arranged before her on the coffee table, a structured array of knowledge, guiding her understanding and providing clarity she had not possessed before. Eleanor lifted one envelope, unfolding the pages with meticulous care, reading and rereading passages that highlighted Robert's observations, his subtle warnings, and the trust he had placed in her discernment. She noticed patterns in Victoria Miller's actions, small signs of manipulation, and inconsistencies that now formed a coherent narrative when aligned with the details Robert had chronicled. Eleanor moved to the bookshelf, adjusting the arrangement of books to make space for new discoveries, noting how each object could serve as a reminder or a clue, a tactile anchor for her reflections. The quiet of the apartment allowed her thoughts to flow uninterrupted, each memory and observation connecting to another, building a framework of insight that Eleanor could navigate deliberately. She paused by the window, observing the neighbors' movements, the distant lights of passing cars, and the subtle sounds of life continuing outside, unaware of the careful consideration occurring within. Eleanor felt a growing sense of empowerment, the result of patient observation, reflection, and the guidance Robert had left behind. She walked to the bedroom, where another small box awaited, filled with documents and photographs, each item revealing additional context, further informing her understanding of Victoria's behavior and intentions. Eleanor handled each piece with precision, noting dates, details, and subtle cues that aligned with her evolving comprehension. She returned to the coffee table, reviewing her mental map of insights, organizing strategies in her mind, preparing for the careful steps she would take to act with discernment. The apartment, bathed in the soft glow of city lights, had become a sanctuary of thought, a space where careful observation, reflection, and preparation merged seamlessly. Eleanor Miller moved slowly through her surroundings, reinforcing the order she had established, the clarity she had achieved, and the quiet determination that now filled her. Every paper, every photograph, every carefully placed object served as a guide and a reminder of the path she would follow with patience, attention, and measured resolve. She allowed herself a final glance around the apartment, feeling the quiet weight of understanding settle within her, knowing that the work of observation and insight would empower her to navigate the complexities of the family dynamics with precision, composure, and a quiet confidence that had grown steadily throughout the day. Eleanor Miller stood by the window one last time, the soft glow reflecting in her eyes, ready to proceed with clarity, strategy, and the quiet strength Robert had always known she possessed. The night deepened further, the city outside Eleanor Miller's apartment glowing with the soft shimmer of streetlights and distant headlights. She moved deliberately through her living space, observing the carefully arranged letters, photographs, and documents that Robert had left behind, each one a piece of the intricate puzzle she was piecing together. Eleanor picked up a photograph of a family gathering, noting the subtle expressions and positions of each individual, the nuances that Robert had highlighted in his letters, and the small actions that now revealed layers of intention and hidden motives. She laid the photograph back gently and turned her attention to a stack of documents she had not yet reviewed in detail, each page containing dates, notes, and observations that required careful consideration. Eleanor traced the lines of text with her fingers, rereading entries, cross-referencing details, and forming a mental map that allowed her to see connections that had previously escaped notice. The apartment was silent except for the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the occasional distant sound of traffic, a calm that allowed her thoughts to unfold uninterrupted. She reflected on past interactions, small comments, and subtle gestures that now took on new significance, illuminated by the information Robert had entrusted to her. Eleanor moved to the bedroom and opened a drawer she had not examined before, discovering another set of letters and notes that offered further context and reinforced her growing understanding of the family dynamics at play. Each discovery strengthened her resolve, her mind mapping out the details with clarity, forming a comprehensive picture of the situation and the steps she needed to take. She walked slowly to the window, resting her hands on the sill, watching the rhythm of life outside while considering the layers of information she had collected. Eleanor felt a quiet, steady determination, a sense of control emerging from the careful attention and methodical analysis she had applied throughout the day. Every item, every note, every photograph became a guide, a reminder of past events and a tool for navigating the complexities of relationships, intentions, and trust. She returned to the living room, organizing the documents into neat piles, aligning photographs, and reviewing her notes, ensuring that each observation was cataloged and accessible. The apartment, once a simple new beginning, had transformed into a space of insight, preparation, and strategic reflection, where Eleanor could calmly process, understand, and act with precision. She breathed slowly, letting the soft glow of city lights filter through the blinds, feeling the apartment embrace her as a sanctuary for thought and careful planning. Eleanor Miller knew that the work of observation, analysis, and patience would guide her toward clarity and the ability to approach the unfolding circumstances with intelligence, composure, and quiet confidence. As she moved through the rooms one last time that evening, she felt a subtle satisfaction in the methodical organization and reflection she had completed, readying herself for the next day, when her careful planning and insight would begin to reveal their purpose and impact. The first hints of dawn crept into Eleanor Miller's apartment, casting a soft, pale light across the carefully arranged documents, photographs, and letters that had guided her understanding over the past days. She stood in the living room, her hands lightly resting on the back of a chair, surveying the space as if seeing it anew, every object and detail now infused with the weight of insight and clarity. Eleanor's mind traced the sequence of discoveries she had made, the patterns she had observed, and the subtle intentions Robert had encoded in his notes, each one a thread connecting past actions to present understanding. She walked to the coffee table, lifting a photograph once more, noting the expressions, the angles, and the small gestures that now spoke volumes about the truth she had gradually assembled. Eleanor returned to the letters, unfolding pages she had read many times, yet finding nuances she had not fully appreciated before, subtle guidance and foresight that Robert had left for her to uncover when she was ready. She moved through the apartment methodically, touching surfaces, adjusting objects, and taking note of details, each action reinforcing her connection to the space and the strategy it represented. The quiet of the early morning allowed her thoughts to unfold, reflecting on the interactions, choices, and behaviors of Victoria Miller, connecting them with the careful record-keeping and advice Robert had entrusted to her. Eleanor's focus was meticulous, her attention unwavering, and her composure steady, as she mentally prepared for the steps ahead, understanding that patience and timing were essential to navigating the complexities before her. She approached the window, looking out over the quiet street below, the city slowly waking with the faint murmur of distant cars, neighbors beginning their day, unaware of the careful planning and insight being cultivated within the apartment. Eleanor felt a growing sense of readiness, a calm confidence that came from thorough observation and deliberate reflection, recognizing the subtle power of knowledge and understanding. Each document, each photograph, and each carefully observed detail formed a cohesive picture, allowing her to anticipate, plan, and act with precision when the moment arrived. She sat briefly in the kitchen, letting the sunlight touch the countertops, tracing her hand along the smooth surface, and feeling the weight of responsibility and clarity settle over her. Eleanor Miller understood that the apartment, filled with objects of memory, letters, and notes, was not just a living space but a sanctuary for thought, reflection, and strategic preparation. She moved one last time through the rooms, reviewing her notes, organizing the documents, and allowing herself a quiet, steady exhale, the culmination of days of careful attention and understanding. The morning light fully illuminated the apartment now, and Eleanor felt a sense of calm readiness, knowing that the observations, insights, and plans she had meticulously gathered would guide her forward, empowering her to navigate the unfolding circumstances with patience, clarity, and quiet resolve.